Call the North Plains City Council Work Session, February 17th, 2026 to order at 6 p.m. And for the record, we are to do the Pledge of Allegiance during the council meeting, not in the work session. Apologies. The purpose of the work session is going to be for Chief to present on non-building code enforcement. So mostly focused on legal stuff, things like traffic infractions and whatever else he deals with. And the reason we asked him to do this is we're trying to be more modern, let's say, in our approach and do things the right way. And we want to make sure that our law enforcement partners have the appropriate regulations and code to do their jobs, and then also determine how we're going to enforce those in a uniform and fair way. So with that, I will turn it over to Chief.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I'm Mayor Dunbrow. Just briefly, I want to introduce, to my left, Sergeant Eamon O'Reilly. He will be filling in as the interim chief here shortly, and he'll get to introduce himself later tonight during staff reports. I just want to take a couple minutes before we jump into code enforcement and address. I wasn't here at last 2 weeks ago council meeting about there was a request made by council for a police activity report. So I was requested to give an update here quickly on that request that came out of council as a whole. My understanding, it came out of some information received on Facebook or social media elsewhere about some incidents up in Bryn Hill, specifically some squatters and the serious domestic violence situation is kind of what pulling it from the minutes. Just first, I wanted to throw out a kind of a word of caution, which I'm sure we've all heard 1,000 times, about relying on social media for like full and accurate accounting of incidents that happen. Often it's a very one-sided perception and not necessarily neutral based. And so it's good for a level of awareness, but not necessarily the whole story of kind of what you're looking for.
That's why we're to you.
Yes, and that's why I'm here to kind of let you guys know that we're not really in a position on the regular to release information about police activity. There's several reasons for it, and I kind of run through them. I just jotted down some notes because I want to make sure I hit all kind of the high points. But obviously, as we tell everybody, if you guys see, or hear of any kind of criminal activity, obviously I know without a doubt you guys are going to be calling that into non-emergency, and at minimum you're going to be following with an email probably to myself or the deputies for us to follow up on. But it's kind of those in-between times when it gets out on social media. How can we clear the air on that information? And unfortunately, we're kind of in a position where social media is what it is, and we don't have the capacity to kind of correct the information that gets put out there in these circumstances. And really kind of the overall blanket statement is we just can't release information about police activity in that level of detail. One of the big reasons is just a privacy piece for all involved. Not only we consider the victim if it's a person crime, but also the person being suspected of committing a crime. So we got to be mindful and kind of balancing out not only the privacy rights of the victim, but also the person that's being accused of committing a crime or violation. And secondly, and just as importantly, just protecting the integrity of the investigation. We're limited on what we can share just for investigative reasons. We can't kind of show our cards. I mean, it's just not best practice by any stretch of the imagination. And we're in a position of, like I said, social media doesn't necessarily have to remain neutral, but we do. And so it's helping us maintain neutrality and really just focusing on our mission, which is fact-finding in nature. And so refraining from putting that information out there, it kind of alleviates the option for some undue influence. If you get people pushing back on information you release about something, that way we try to limit any bias when it comes to an investigation. And lastly, and I think one of the most important things is the community trust aspect. If we go forth and release information about an incident that happens in a neighborhood, what's to entice that victim from calling us again next time if they know that their story is going to be put out there for the neighbors to see? And so all those things into consideration, just as a practice, don't release kind of detailed investigative pieces that happen. And it's difficult here in North Plains. I guess it's a blessing and a curse, if you say, because we're such a small community. These are our neighbors. We know what's going on. We at least look out our window or we talk as we're walking down the street and we get this information. But from a law enforcement perspective, we're just not at liberty to kind of share that kind of stuff. The saying is law enforcement information is on a need to know basis. And generally speaking, most people don't need to know any of that information. And I kind of share this with you guys because I want to make sure that the expectations are accurate, that I want to be, and I know O'Reilly is the same, as we want to be as open and transparent as we can, but we have limitations in which we have to operate under. I just want you guys to know that we, at any time we have any kind of concern about a public safety issue that's widespread or a threat to the community, that kind of stuff will absolutely get communicated out. But isolated incidents like what we saw in Bryn Hill, and gets posted on social media, especially when it comes to persons related crimes, we're just not at liberty to kind of discuss those details. So I hope that makes sense. I'm happy to talk about that. Have any questions, answer any questions you guys might have about that topic.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for that. With that, we'll move into the code enforcement piece of tonight's work session. Thank you, Rowan. So you can go ahead and jump to the next slide if you will. Next slide. So these are just kind of high level topics we're gonna kind of cover tonight, as far as my presentation in this work session go. The goal is to just provide the overview of how our code enforcement process works currently. It's relatively new in the sense that as of this summer, we didn't really have a good solidified process in place citywide to kind of handle the kind of an influx of code violations. And then with that, I want, as we're talking through all this, kind of keep in mind, and I didn't really highlight it in any one slide, but overarching just theme is our code enforcement is generally complaint driven. We don't really have bandwidth, generally speaking. It does happen occasionally, but majority of our code enforcement is complaint driven code enforcement. So then after kind of cover some of this overview on kind of what our process is, I want to focus your attention to kind of three main areas that we've identified with the police department to really kind of dig in and start focusing, moving things forward. And I'll be looking kind of for you guys' feedback as we kind of get in those. But overall, if you have any point, anytime, I know sometimes we do work sessions where let me breeze through this and we'll talk. If you have a question, let's talk about it when it comes up. That's what I would prefer. So the next slide. So this next slide is, I don't know if we can move some of that. It's all right. I'll cover it for you guys, and we'll make sure you guys get it afterwards too. But basically, prior to what we're going to talk about, we didn't really have a good formal process citywide on handling these code enforcement complaints as they come in. They were handled kind of inconsistently across departments. Public Works would handle it a certain way, and planning might handle theirs a direct way. You're giving all the good stuff, Rowan.
I'm trying to make the bar go away for you.
It's okay. And so everybody kind of had their own little flair in how they were handling their specific areas of responsibilities. And recognizing this as kind of being a downfall of kind of overall efficacy and just kind of consistency citywide. Myself, along with Rowan and Dustin from the planning public works department, and Lori all sat down, I believe it was July or August, and we kind of just started from the very beginning of how a resident sees a code complaint, has a concern, and how it kind of, and follow that through the whole process and what that should look like for all of us. So we sat down and spent a good amount of time around a whiteboard and kind of ironing things out. And what we came up with is just kind of a collaborative approach to tracking our code complaints, really identifying like department jurisdiction, who's going to be responsible for what, and take what is your responsibility versus what's my responsibility, where do those kind of cross over if they do, and then trying to adopt some best practices out of some neighboring cities, taking, not reinventing the wheel, but maybe working a little smarter sometimes and seeing what other people have in place that might be working and what might not be, and talking to our neighboring partners and just to see what they're doing when it comes to code enforcement. And then really at the end of it, what it came down to is just kind of a more unified framework that allowed us to be more consistent and efficient when kind of addressing code concerns. So this is just an infographic kind of demonstrating what department is responsible for what area of code enforcement. I'd like to kind of branch it out where like the police department really addresses kind of all the livability concerns, stuff that makes your neighborhood look so attractive, or is kind of bothersome to passerbys, or kind of the livability, like the quality of life kind of stuff throughout the community. That's really the stuff that police department focuses on when it comes to code enforcement. That's gonna be, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm hoping that the answer is yes, but is this something that at some point we'll put out to the community, like publish everywhere so they can see this? Because this is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just made this last week, so yes, eventually.
When do you get there? No, I love it because it will, I think it will prevent a lot of questions is what I'm getting at. So
And that's the goal.
excellent.
Yeah, that's the goal, is to something that's, really the initial thought behind this was something internally where, April working our front desk and looking, okay, this came in, who does it go to? But now in this format, it's easy just to distribute publicly also and have available online, so people know kind of where to turn. But getting back to kind of what I was saying, is the police department is really focused around livability stuff and kind of the stuff that affects quality of life within neighborhoods and within the community. For public works is really more that over, things that public works do, the water system, we get the beaver dams flooding Gordon Road, we get, the visual obstructions of trees and stuff out in the right of way obstructions, road construction, that kind of stuff where there's concerns around infrastructure, city infrastructure, roadways, and the water system is really the umbrella of the Public Works Department. And then Rowan, the planning department, their responsibility is really about, land use and building use, in addition to signs. The crux of everybody's problems. I'm sorry?
All grass is police, huh?
Yeah, on private property. So if you don't mow your yard, I'm gonna.
Oh, because it's an ordinance, right? That
Yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah, and so right of way vegetation, that's gonna fall to, because in the right of way that falls to Public Works, but anything on private property, overgrown yards and that kind of stuff would fall to us, yeah. So that was just kind of a good overview and a kind of an easy way to just look and identify, those are the high level stuff that we deal with most often, and what department they fall under. And then again, coming out of that, kind of, I guess, internal work session that we had, the city staff over the summer about process for, code violations. It kind of breaks down into 5 simple steps, and we'll walk through them a little more in depth, but basically the kind of that intake and triage piece at the beginning, when we initially get a complaint and how it's filed, and then identifying where it's gonna go, whose desk it's gonna land on, and then conducting a reasonable investigation, given what the violation accusation is, documenting our findings and communicating that to not only the property owner, but circling back with the complainant and letting them know the disposition of kind of how the investigation is going and what next steps are. And then the follow-up piece, really documenting and being thorough and consistent on our follow-up piece, because I think that's the crux of every code enforcement effort across everywhere across the land is the follow-up piece. We can try to impose code enforcement on somebody, cleaning up a nuisance property, but if we're not diligent about the follow-up and the accountability piece, then it just kind of falls deaf. And then lastly, if it comes to enforcement and abatement, what that looks like. So kind of breaking this down just a little bit, just a high level view is the intake piece, really covering receiving the complaints, which those are the 4 main ways we do it up there. Online, I think I would say is the preferred method. That back image, it's kind of hard to see where it says report an issue. That's on the city's website. I don't know if you guys have looked at that. And I probably give kudos, I believe it's due to Dustin for creating that. It's really thorough and it's well done. You can go to and you can choose which department it's addressed to. I did a little test last week and police department complaint and it came to my inbox. And so as to my knowledge, the system works. And so I think that would be a universal thought amongst all the departments. That's the preferred method for reporting a code concern. Because it's efficient, it's tracked in email, and the information it's requesting is pretty thorough. So you can do it via northplains.gov under report an issue. You can email directly to the department. That's probably our least favorite, but it works. And then by phone, you can always call City Hall. Our staff should have access to that front image, which is the code enforcement complaint intake form. That's the bulk of it there. There's a little more top and bottom that's cut off, but that's the bulk of what that intake form looks like. That can be filled out via phone. If we call, we'll just jot one of those out, or then in person, you can come to City Hall and do the same thing. So once that intake process is done, we'll go through and it'll basically be triaged and assigned to the appropriate department based off of that graphic we had earlier, who's responsible for what. And then that is going to get the next step kind of in that intake process is logging it into our complaint tracking spreadsheet, which I'll give props to Rowan for creating. And I tried to break it, and it's pretty efficient too. So we're doing well. So basically, once that complaint is assigned, it's going to get, if it's assigned to me, I'm going to go into this spreadsheet or Lori will do it for me because she's a great help. And that'll get tracked, it'll get assigned a case number of what department's responsible for it. And then it's kind of hard to see in this image, and I didn't have a really good way to blow it up to show it to you, but it'll be better when you get the PDF version. But we can track dates across when notices were sent, when property owners are notified, when follow-up is due, and that kind of stuff, and where it is in the process to kind of help us keep an eye on things. So we're kind of moving the pebble down the road, so to speak. And the last thing, and I think is one of the coolest pieces of this spreadsheet, is you can add just a hyperlink to the case file. And the goal is that every one of these code complaints has basically a case file that has the intake form attached to it. It has, photographs from your document, all your documentation, everything from that complaint goes in there. And so if it ever needs to be pulled back for, if we need to readdress it, or if there's a concern that's elevated past just the department handling it, or if it's a public records deal, whatever it is, it's contained in one spot and easily tracked. Moving on to kind of the second and third phases of the whole code enforcement process. The investigations and finally, like I said, we're going to create a case file, and everything we do for that complaint is going to be dropped into that case file and can be reviewed by any department dealing with code enforcement. We're going to review and identify the complaint and identify a code. If you write in and says, this is my concern, this is my problem, then it's our job then to turn around and say, okay, this is what they're saying in a narrative. How do I apply code to that, and which one would apply? And so us identifying the applicable code, and then conducting, like I said, a reasonable investigation depending on the complaint. It could be just, starting with identifying who owns the property, having a phone call conversation to see kind of what the story is, doing a site visit, taking some photographs, and just kind of putting all of our ducks in a row, and really verifying, do we have a legitimate code complaint, or if it's just concerned citizen, or what the issue really is, and if it's worth kind of moving forward through the process. And I think that updating the case file and everything gets dumped in there. And I think, really lastly in that investigation is confirming that the code still applies. Just like in law enforcement, they lay claim to a crime happened, we investigate and we prove whether it did or didn't hold it, right? So that's the same kind of concept we investigate code. And like everything else, we're documenting our findings, from photographs to our conversations, our timelines, all that stuff gets documented and put in a case file. Identifying kind of an action plan, should there be something that needs to be rectified and corrected. Preparing some official notices. That's one kind of project we have still in the hopper for departments, is preparing some pre-made templates. If it's a tall grass violation, we just pull that canned message out of the hat and fill in the identifying details, and off it can go, right? And so we're not having to recreate it every single time, just to be more efficient. Contacting the property owner, and talking about that action plan and kind of some findings and what needs to happen, and working with them on an appropriate timeline. And like I said, circling back to the complainant so they know that we actually took some action and saw through that. We heard your complaint, this is what we found, and this is kind of how it's going forward. And then the last two steps of the kind of code enforcement process that we identified is the follow-up piece. Like I said, that responsibility is going to fall on each department that's responsible for that specific complaint. And seeing that kind of through the process, verifying that the corrective action, if necessary, had been taken. And so going out, maybe doing another site visit or a phone call or a meeting in the office with property owners. And then all that, that it was all followed in accordance with the notice. We're documenting all that. And then if we gain compliance and that code complaint is now fixed and no longer an issue, it's done there. We close it, we move on. If there's still corrective action that needs to be taken and we're not getting the compliance we need from the responsible party, then we're going to move on and identifying what appropriate enforcement might look like. And that kind of varies based on the department. For us, it's generally a citation into, with the appropriate ordinance violation and the associated fee. Planning and be more like an administrative fine. How that's billed out was to be determined. I'm not sure in our time it's ever really been handled that way through planning. Public Works can have the same kind of fine and fee structure with abatement costs if there's abatement associated with the fixing the violation. So it really depends on within the department what the appropriate enforcement mechanism is, and then obviously updating that case file with disposition at the end of all. Any questions kind of about overall process, code enforcement process? Councilor.
I mean, this sounds really great. The concern I would have, and it sounds like you're starting to work on it, is really tightening up how it's gonna work. Like I just went in the gov and typed in complaint. I don't get anything when I just type in a search. So I don't know to type in report and abuse. So
Right.
How do we get it correlated enough that it goes somewhere? The other thing is when I call on the phone after hours, whatever, how do you make sure there's a place I go to? Cause I don't know which department to go to. I just know I'm upset about whatever, so.
Sure.
I mean, you don't have to answer that now,
No,
but
and
I
that's-
think we just gotta practice. It's gotta be very user friendly
Yeah.
and then part of that, you know, like if I walk into the office, does the front office woman have a form for me to fill out, or does she have to clarify if I want to talk to Public Works, the sheriff, or, right?
Yeah.
Again, you don't have to answer all that. I think this is great what we're doing, just more clarity. Cause that's where people get frustrated is they try, right? They call after hours.
Mhm.
You know, and at some point we have to tell them, the big issue in my neighborhood, we need to let them know that when your dog goes in the neighbor's yard, we're not gonna do anything about that.
Right, yeah, I hear you. I appreciate that feedback. That's good feedback. And those are all kind of pinch points that we have to kind of work through as we're
Yeah,
trying to
that's good.
improve the system. But that's good feedback. I appreciate that. Any other questions about kind of process, the way it's kind of laid out here? Okay. Good. Yeah. So kind of now that we've talked about the process and what we're trying to work towards that model of handling them every time consistently, through kind of that, like I said, that collaborative process we've identified. Going forward, I want the focus to be now what the police department should be focusing on and working on kind of as when it comes to code and kind of these kind of projects we have going. So this kind of specifically as we go through, we're going to talk about code updates. We're going to talk about a class infraction model. I'd like us to consider eventually it kind of our municipal court current situation, maybe some considerations going forward and what that might look like. So as we talk about these next handful of slides, this is when I'd really appreciate feedback that you guys have to kind of help us drive. Like I said, we've identified these as our big priorities when it kind of comes to code enforcement from the public safety perspective. But as we talk about these, as you have that, please encourage feedback. Okay, so kind of the work to be done, and this slide this is covering kind of our code update slide. And I threw a bunch of stuff up here, and it's not exclusive, and there's offshoots of all of this, and so these are kind of high level ones. I'll kind of start with parking. I know there was a hot topic within the last 12 months about commercial motor vehicle parking within neighborhoods. And right, wrong, or different, it's a topic we got to discuss and address because we don't have anything in code that addresses that issue specifically. You know, there's other local municipalities that do have code specifically that addresses where commercial motor vehicles can park and for how long and in what manner and all that stuff directly addressing commercial motor vehicles. We don't have that. And so as the police department, when you have a person upset on one side of the issue and the other side of the issue, we don't really have, we just get to stand in the middle. So we don't have no direction in our code to address that issue. And so to me, that's when it comes to parking, that's one of the biggest highlighted issues I think we could spend some time on, because there are good examples locally of cities that are using the code to address that issue that we've experienced here in North Plains. Our RV and travel trailer code, it leaves some kind of open-ended pieces to it when it comes to boats and cargo trailers. It can be interpreted specifically for RVs and travel trailers, which is important. And there's definitely a need for a code around that, but it just leaves some open-ended questions when it comes to how does it apply to boats and cargo trailers and other things outside of something you can just go camping. And then prohibited parking. One thing that I've seen across other jurisdictions, they'll have specific code to address, you know, when the city puts up a temporary no parking area addressing that, or yellow striping on a curb, or specific designated no parking zones, something specific in code that's it's black and white that is enforceable based off of our code and not defaulting to other things elsewhere. A lot of times our code is antiquated in areas where we can find the answer if we jump through about 14 hoops and kind of follow this definition to this, this, and this. When there's models out there that can be a lot more clear and direct throughout, and we don't have to interpret this one to interpret that one to interpret the next one. So it's going through and looking at some of those that are, I mean, some of those, if you've looked any of the code that a lot of it's several decades old that we're working enforcing. There's stuff out there that's a lot. The city's changed a lot in 20 years, and so it's worth looking at some of those highlighted areas. are abandoned and disabled vehicles. So all the vehicles that we tow in North Plains, generally speaking, I would say that they all fall under our abandoned vehicle code, which again is one of those codes where, if you read the abandoned vehicle code, it really lacks clarity on abandoned versus disabled. A lot of places tow on abandoned or disabled. We lump disabled into our abandoned code, although we have a definition for disabled, and so it's messy, I guess is a good way to put it. And there's clearer, more defensible ways to word that in code. And it's just one of those areas that just it works, but it doesn't work well.
Okay, so how often are we dealing with abandoned and disableds?
More often than you'd think.
You guys are good at that. That's
so-
impressive.
Anytime you drive around town and you see one of our pink tow stickers, it's falling into that ordinance.
Okay.
91.35, and it's basically parked for more than 24 hours, and I'm paraphrasing, so I don't remember it exactly, but 24 hours in the same location, expired tags, doesn't look operable, there's a criteria that it has to meet, right? And so, anytime we get calls relatively frequently from the community that just says, hey, there's an abandoned vehicle in my neighborhood. Councilor Weber, your neighborhood, great about calling, this car's been sitting here for a while, come take a look at it, and so,
Greatest.
yeah, and so yeah, we get those quite often that we're dealing with those. It's, expired tags that just someone left their car that doesn't run anymore, and it's sitting
Yeah.
on the street,
Okay.
growing moss,
Interesting.
kind of thing.
Question?
Yeah.
I've talked about it, and I walk around the city all the time. It's like we have almost two different cities. So you take Bryn Hill and Sunset Ridge, and then you take the old part of town. There's no comparison, right? They don't have the same set of rules, and I want to be respectful of that. They park wherever. They have the trailers all the time. My HOA wants to just, and I'm not a huge fan of it, they want to do everything. They claim we have an HOA rule that says you can't park a trailer out in front of a house on a city street. But you can address that in a minute. I'm not sure that's legal because it's a city street, right?
But I can't speak to the legality of the HOA rule over city ordinance. I'm not gonna touch that one, but I can tell you what I enforce is ordinance and law, and that is allowed based off of ordinance and law to park on your street. How your
The
HOA
trailer
wants to enforce
can,
it.
so you won't, if the HOA calls because somebody's disobeyed our rule and they're parking their trailer, you're not gonna do
We
it.
don't enforce HOA rules,
Exactly.
regardless of the HOA rule.
Yeah, that's civil, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's where this tension is.
Yeah.
That if we respond too much to Sunset Ridge and Bryn Hill, we've got these old timers and they don't have sidewalks and they park in the gravel and they've parked their thing there forever.
So I'll refer you back to, we heard complaint to, well, chief is a complaint driven department.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if people complain,
Yeah.
people respond, but and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to speak for you, but I don't believe we don't have a parking, person, I don't know what you call it, parking person anymore.
Yeah, parking.
Parking enforcement, thank you. We don't have active parking enforcement, we have 3 deputies that are trying to do everything.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, if people complain, I believe that they'll enforce it.
yeah, so.
Right, but what I'm getting at is I'm not sure, at least for me, I wouldn't add a bunch more rules on RVs and trailers and boats because
It,
can we enforce it and are we
so,
catering too much to the new
So
one?
absolutely, the city can enforce it.
yes,
So if
Right.
the city has an ordinance against it, the city can enforce it. Even in your HOA, those are city public streets in your HOA. If the HOA has a more restrictive rule, that's on them to enforce. We wouldn't enforce. If the HOA says you can't park a trailer, the city ordinance says you can, but for X amount of hours. We do that, you can for X amount of hours. We don't enforce the, well, you can't at all. That's an HOA enforcement, and I don't know what that looks like for your specific HOA. I just know we wouldn't enforce that.
So-
We defer to ordinance.
and I'll paraphrase what chief is getting at, is we're looking for, clear and objective, as Ron always reminds us. Clear and objective, everything that we do in code needs to be so obvious that an attorney can't find out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they will, but I'm just saying, like, it should be so clear that an average high school graduate should be able to pick it up and say, oh, I understand this, I can't do this.
And to that
So-
point, that's part of the issue with our abandoned code now is that we tag everything as abandoned. And let's say this vehicle's registered to, Aaron Dumbrow, but it's expired and growing moss in the front of his house. That's not necessarily, I mean, he might say that my vehicle's not abandoned, I owned it. It's not, I didn't just leave it somewhere. but it's disabled. And so it's kind of like, let's match the proper
Yeah.
words with what we're actually enforcing. So that I can say, no, it's disabled and that's why it's tagged not.
Let's make the judge's life a little bit less painful, so he doesn't have to sit there and try to do, yoga to get through the
Yeah.
fencing.
And in turn our life.
And you're, yeah,
Yeah.
But do we favor a lot more rules is what I'm getting at, because there's a real
It's-
tension between
no.
Old North Plains and Denver.
that doesn't have anything to do with it. It's all one city, so it's not more rules, it's clear rules. There may be more rules or there may be less, but the point is, it should be completely clear as to what it is. If we split a rule, it is technically more rules, but it's also clear and objective so that anybody can understand it, whether they live in old or new parts of the city. So there should be one standard across the board. How it's enforced, that's up to who calls it in. If you don't complain, then we can't really enforce it.
And lastly, on this slide about kind of one of the big glaring areas that we should really look at as far as code updates goes, we don't have a municipal code addressing graffiti. And I mean, we have like criminal mischief, like in ORS, we have graffiti in ORS, but really a municipal code addressing graffiti specifically. And looking at, again, some local examples, the reason I kind of want to dive into the look of that, not only have we had it like occurrences of graffiti across the city on the rise, but also it gives us the ability to address it not only, some go so strict as if you basically possess a graffiti instrument with intent to apply graffiti, it's a violation of an ordinance, therefore a finable offense. But also it holds some teeth on the cleanup and removal of said graffiti, which is also one of the first ways to combat a graffiti problem is the early removal of graffiti. So it gives us the ability to address that specifically of, okay, you now have, I'm sorry, you had your fence tagged, but you need to get it removed in X amount of days per code. And so it gives us the ability to kind of address that concern also. So, which we don't currently have. And so I think those are looking through our code. And again, this, I think you guys talked about it in land use. It's, you look at one and then you think, oh, what
Yeah.
about this one? And so you can really spiderweb this out into a lot. These are kind of like the overall big arching areas that I think are issues, kind of that parking lump, the disabled versus abandoned kind of vehicles and what we address there, and kind of this graffiti issues. And under that graffiti, I could probably lump that even more broadly to kind of just nuisances in general. I mean, graffiti would fall into a nuisance category as far as I'm concerned, and there's some other stuff within the nuisance code that we could be looking at. But that one is kind of the one that specifically caught my attention, that having dealt with it recently here in the city more than we have. Any questions kind of about that so far? Okay,
I mean, just a practical thing, what I would favor is your lead of, here's something we would find helpful if there's something on graffiti.
sure,
Cause I don't wanna add more stuff that you're saying, whoa, I don't need that.
yeah.
So I would love to hear eventually, we don't have to do it now, but what you would favor that change.
Understood, thank you. All right, next, I kind of prefaced it a little bit ago about this, this fine or fee structure, or I guess I'm gonna call it a fine structure. And this came under, advisement from Emily, the city attorney recently. It's been adopted locally, or working on being adopted locally in some other jurisdictions. What our current fine structure is set up now to be is, we use the general penalty model, it's ordinance 10.99. It basically states the fines are not to exceed $500, but what it does, it kind of leaves some discretion to who's imposing the fine as to what that fine is going to be in a lot of cases. With the stipulation that if it's something that could be penalized under ORS and they are convicted of that violation and default to the ORS violation. And so it allows a lot of discretion, but also not a lot of clear direction. And it can kind of be like, well, today I feel like fining you $100, but tomorrow I might feel like fining you $500, or, and so it leaves a lot of just kind of gray area within the fine structure when it comes to code enforcement and ordinance violations. So kind of the recommended model coming, like I said, from BEH and some other jurisdictions are adopting it and looking at going to it is similar to what ORS has in place for like traffic violations. It's just a class infraction basically model. So these class infractions would be like traffic code. You got a class A, B, C, and D. And these infractions would be like a certain dollar amount, like the class A moving violation state Oregon is $440 fine and it goes down to 115, I think is the 165, somewhere in there, I can't remember, but it's been a minute. And so it clearly defines what each basically violation is, say, we'll use graffiti, for example, is a class A violation. Well, we know class A violations are X because in our fee schedule, it identifies class A as $440 or whatever it might be. Yes.
And I'm assuming this is adopted as part of the budget in the the regular fee schedule, correct?
That's also one of the perks of it is that
Okay.
we can, instead of right now, if we wanted to change the fine associated with certain ordinances, you have to go through code and find where all that is and change it in an individual spot. If we know that we want graffiti to be a class A violation, our top violation, well, class A is gonna take whatever the class A is in the fine, in the fee schedule, which you guys adopt during budget time, right? And so, or every year, whenever we've got the fee schedule, so it can be changed more readily, easily. And on an annual basis, we can say, yeah, we're gonna up that or down that or whatever, and it's across the board, all class A's would be this, all class B's this, and so forth. So it kind of streamlines that, updating, and it just makes it a cleaner, less discretion about. I like Counselor Papen, so I'm only gonna, charge her this much for this, but it should. So that's kind of, like I said, one of the three big areas. As the police department should start focusing, I think, on some of our code updates would be this fine structure and leaning towards the class violation model. I see a lot of good reasons to go to it. I've yet to find, and we're not done looking at necessarily hearing from Emily about it, but I'm not heard any kind of cons to the concept. Any questions about it? Cool. Okay, another one, this kind of falls into the fine schedule, and it wasn't one of my top three, but I think it's certainly worth a consideration, and we'd have to have a few things in place in order for this to happen, really, but this is used, again, around us in other jurisdictions that I think is really popular. This is a concept of a municipal code citation, and so right now what we do in the city of North Plains is we write everything on a standard ORS citation. It goes to our municipal court, which is serviced by the justice court, and we're citing mainly under ORS violations, and it's the 110 or 115 all the way up to 440. What this does is it's a specific citation to our city that's branded with our city, that's got limited information, and what its purpose is to give another enforcement mechanism that's really meant to just gain compliance and not be as punitive. We can go and it's hard to see on here, so I apologize for that, but we can go write you an ORS parking ticket for $110 or $115 or whatever it is, or we could pull out our municipal code site book and write you one for $25, just to say, please don't park there anymore. Like, just enough to get your attention, to get you compliant, to be paying attention to certain.
So so this doesn't go to muni court?
It gets heard at community court.
Oh,
It would-
does it?
it would-
Okay,
it
that was
would
my question.
process.
Sorry.
The way other local jurisdictions just say runs through their municipal court, it just doesn't get flagged in any kind of state court system.
Okay,
And so it's handled locally at the municipal level.
so we still have an adjudicating officer?
Yep,
Okay.
you can still go and you can either contest it, you can pay it, or, those are basically your two choices. But it's a far smaller infraction.
Perfect.
And I can tell you just from an enforcement perspective, deputies are far more inclined to want to enforce this kind of stuff when it doesn't feel so grinchy to
Yes.
write you that $115 parking ticket, when really we want you to comply, but I don't have a really good, what I feel to be kind of sometimes a reasonable mechanism to gain the compliance. And so this kind of opens that option up. It also, we could identify some, we can kind of expand the concept on this municipal code citation to include more, maybe some public works right-of-way issues or some planning. Maybe this is a mechanism for planning to issue some fees through. It doesn't necessarily have to be done by, sworn person, law enforcement officer kind of thing. It's handled at the municipal code level.
And real quick, so this is officer's discretion to write either this or, okay, I just want to double check.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So where is our current municipal court? If somebody has an issue and they have to contest it, where do they go and how does that work?
It's a good question. It's a very good segue into my next slide. So if there's no further questions on this, I'm happy to, Councilor Pavement.
I also had a question about municipal court. This is Counselor Pavement. I just had a question regarding, for example, there is a line item on there that says, trailer camper parked for over 72 hours on street. Is that a hypothetical that a deputy would issue a citation each day that the camper is parked there? Or is it just one and done and someone's like, well, fine, I'll pay my $15 to
So,
keep it
to
here?
answer your question, yes, that would be, each day would be a separate occurrence, which would, could result in a separate citation for each occurrence. This appears just an example, so it doesn't necessarily, ours necessarily would look specifically like this. And there could be mechanisms for elevating that, if you can compound things. I've seen models where the first infraction is this, the next infraction, and the next and the next. Really out of the spirit of gaining compliance, and if somebody's just being absolutely oppositional to complying with it, then it gives you a little more filling person options.
And again, just as a reminder, we are a complaint driven department, so. Somebody's got a complaint for these citations to get written.
Generally speaking,
Generally.
generally speaking, there's sometimes I will go back just a few slides and say that when we see abandoned vehicles,
Fair.
we try to do our best to kind of really address those livability issues, and that is one of the highest ones, and so we try to be proactive on those, but generally speaking, 95% of the time we are complaint driven.
I just want to staunch the panic because I know I've heard you and the other deputies testify, we're going to start enforcement. It's basically going to be a polite, hey, could you not do this? Then it's going to, and
Yeah.
it's a chain of, like, we're not going to go out, if we adopt this, we're not going out tomorrow and writing a whole bunch of citations. Like
Correct.
that, plus that's a lot of work. So you don't want to generate unnecessary work. You want to kind of ease your way into that kind of thing.
Absolutely, yes.
It's just good PR.
Thank you for that. Okay, and then lastly, like mentioned earlier, one of our, I would consider our top 3 priorities is kind of addressing our municipal court, and is it really serving us the best and most effective way? To answer Councilor Weber's question, the way our current municipal court is operated is through the Washington County Justice Court, which is located over on Murray Boulevard at the Washington County facility there in Murray and TV. It is basically done through an intergovernmental agreement that was established back in 2012, where they hear all of our traffic violations. Per the IGA, they're supposed to be hearing all municipal code violations, which I'm not sure the last time we actually wrote a municipal code violation into Justice Court. I'm not sure that the judge and Justice Court would know what to do with that right off the way. It might have to be a phone call before. But that is by contract where those are supposed to be handled. They should be handling all of our basically court proceedings that come from ordinance violations, traffic court, are all handled through the Washington County Justice Court via the IGA that was again signed back in 2012.
And Murray Boulevard again, where's this place?
Murray Boulevard and TV Highway in
West
Beaverton.
Precinct.
Kind of new Valley Catholic.
Or
Okay.
precinct.
Yeah, near Valley Catholic. If you know.
Okay,
Yep.
got it.
So that is what we currently use for court. There's some challenges to that, that court is geographically not real close to North Plains. Scheduling wise, it's hard sometimes that, because they run court several days a week, those subpoenas for court can fall on our deputies' days off, which is an overtime expense that we have to obviously compensate them for their time doing that. And so there's some kind of logistic challenges for us using the Justice Court, which kind of gave us reason to kind of look and see, is this the best model for us currently? I know the city has a history of having a municipal court, which we don't have to jump in today. But really looking at whether Justice Court is really fitting our needs. And Bill and I have started to do some work on looking at what options might be. Just kind of doing some exploratory work, talking with the city of Banks, who holds its own municipal court. They run it in-house in the city of Banks once a month for about an hour. I think it takes them. There's some logistic issues there. Also, they're used to their capacity, and that small staff in the city have the capacity to house an additional city on top of that is a consideration. And the way they operate via an IGF, the Forest Grove Municipal Court, using the same judge, and so there's some kind of inner workings there. There's also kind of a concept out there being explored and thought of, the consideration of what we call like a West Side Justice Court, where it's a model very similar to what we have in Beaverton, but somewhere out here on the west side of the county that municipalities can use in a similar fashion, like the way we use the Justice Court in Beaverton, but just giving it a little more kind of boundaries of when it operates to make it more logistically feasible for our deputies to attend. And also just geographically more appropriate for our deputies and those people that we're likely citing in Justice Court are probably coming from this region also.
Because in the current system, if you give a $25 ticket and somebody contests it, you have to show up, you gotta drive all the way over there for that?
If they contest it, yes.
Yeah, so that's not good.
So that's kind of the overarching view of kind of the way our court works now. Obviously, the benefits of not holding our own municipal court within the city. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces in standing up a court. Not only, I would say the easiest part is hiring a judge. There are a lot of contract workers out there that'll come in and do judge, attorneys that'll work as municipal court judges, kind of on a contract basis. It's really the administrative piece in the back end, the city staff, being a court administrator, that there's databases involved and training involved and certifications involved, and there's just a lot to it. So I think really the city's probably best served by continuing to do something similar to what we're doing, just not sure it's in the same place it's at. And so we still have a lot of work ahead of us to kind of identify what a good feasible solution might be, but it's certainly worth continuing to look.
Councilor Pittman, I think you had a question on this.
No, you answered.
Oh, sorry, okay, I just want to make sure you got your question answered.
And with that, I think that's all I have, unless there's questions about anything specific. I'm happy to answer them. I'm happy if you have any feedback burning. If not, everybody knows how to get a hold of me. Please feel free to do so.
Counselor?
I thought-
Counselor
Go
Ford?
ahead.
I ask a question? So we got a lot of great ideas. How can we convert this into action items that we don't lose track of these code suggestions?
So hold that thought. So I think. Assuming there's consensus. I am looking for consensus, yes, all right, I'm gonna call it consensus,
Of what?
to do something.
Okay.
So I think what Chief's looking for is, yes, we want to move forward with some of these things. Does council believe that the parking, abandoned, disabled, and graffiti / nuisance codes would be good starting points to standardize and have clear and objective code on, whether it's less or more? Seems that way, okay. And again, just remember, just because we pass codes doesn't mean we're actually going out there and writing tickets. I don't want anybody to start panicking, but we're just trying to have things that are easy for deputies to interpret and easy for citizens to interpret and easy for the judge. The other thing I would like, I know you don't have an action item on this yet, or I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean you were going.
No,
That was it?
that was it.
Okay, Councilor Weber.
I'm just saying the same thing, but again, I want to hear from you. What would you like to see as the next steps? I mean, I'm good with the graffiti and the others, but I want to hear from you. Here's 4 things that would help me in my job.
Yeah.
And not give me more work.
Well, and really my intent here is just to kind of put out in front of council what I've identified as what our priorities should be. And so I'd like to know that we're in agreement. These seem like good priorities. And obviously we're happy to, like I said, push the rock down the road and continue to work on these and treat these as priorities. If that's the direction that council would support as kind of our priorities when it comes to code enforcement updates for the police department.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing consensus that we would like to see you move in that direction. I'm also agree on what I personally, I like banks as our court, but I also know some logistics behind that, unfortunately too well. I like the idea of the West Side Justice Court. It's something that I've been talking with Mayor Delenn and Mayor Kirk about just other things, like what can we as cities west of Hillsborough do to help, like to be more, I don't know, helpful to each other. And I personally think it's better because I know it's not great to have deputies having to either leave town or leave on their day off and go all the way. I know it's not that far, but if we could put it, it feels far, and if we could put it closer and make it less onerous, that's just my personal. Cause I just want something that's simple, and I like having the days restricted to only like, whether it's Tuesday, Thursday, or whatever, like 1 or 2 days a week. Then it's less for the deputies to worry about, cause they know, hey, I might have to be in court on one of these days, they can actually have a life.
Yeah.
Or plan their work schedules. And what about the fee schedules? Everybody, what was the thoughts on that? Does anybody have any objections to looking at like an ABC violation schedule? Any concerns on that? All right, I think you have our backing. I think that's what we want to see. Oh, sorry, Council.
The one thing, I know those probably weren't the real numbers, but if it's only $15 infraction fee to have your RV on the street, you have to compare that to the cost of storing it somewhere.
Yeah.
That was my only thought about it.
I agree.
Making the fines
It's true.
enough that people do something about it, and it's not cheaper to pay the fine.
Absolutely.
Well, and I'll just say, I like the graduated fee structure where first violation, second, third, and then fourth violation, maybe go to the ORS. I don't know, like, that's up to you and the attorney, but I like it personally. I think it makes sense to me because the goal is not to beat people over the head with the law, but also to give the law enough teeth to do what it needs to do so the deputies don't have to use it too often. Because hopefully it only take once and then people are like, ooh. That's my thought personally.
And the concept of the municipal code, like violation citations that you're referring to, that, I mean, that seems like something that's. There'd be an appetite for entertaining something like that if we, I mean, there's moving pieces to kind of get something like that in place as far as. Making sure the court would hear it and what court and that kind of stuff, but should all those things fall into place, I mean, there would be an appetite for entertaining something of that nature.
I think so, yes.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And I would just ask if there's anything else that comes up, just bring it back, because I think this is helpful. This is a great starting point. And then once we get through this, I don't want to lose traction. And also, like I said, if we can get something like that infographic app, especially when we do State of the City, I want to, like, this is the kind of stuff, I'll just say personally, sometimes the city feels like a black box, like things go in and then it like eventually comes out. But if we can highlight some of the great work that staff does, I think it would be great to show this and be like, hey, look, you know, all these departments actually sat down and came up with a flow diagram. To me, I love flow diagrams. I think it's cool. But I think it would mean a lot to people to see, like, hey, this is what's actually happening. This is how we're progressing forward. So I mean, to me, that would be a huge win to help people understand. And then as we, you know, like, as we go through some of the website design, hopefully in the future, we can even make it more, make it simple to try to get as many people to submit online as possible, is what I'm trying to say. So I know that would make it easier for everyone.
Yes, absolutely. And that just, I want to touch on that real quick before we wrap up, is that I absolutely agree. I like to keep things progressing and moving on the tracks going. But I'm sure we all can recognize there's a lot here, so it's gonna be a slow chug, but we're gonna keep chugging. So bear with us also. If you have questions, obviously, if you think, hey, we haven't heard about this in a while, feel free to ask. But we're gonna keep chugging at it, but it's just gonna be kind of a slow chug.
Council Pavement, I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you and Bill have done with this, and also welcome aboard, Sergeant O'Reilly or Deputy O'Reilly. My next question was, you know, actionable, like, by when could we see this before us to vote on, and by when could we post that beautiful infographic that you made with city resources?
I think the most obtainable, like low hanging fruit, is the infographic. And I was just making myself notes here. Rowan is the guru at trying to get stuff manipulated on the website, probably better than anybody, at least in City Hall. So we can work together on finding a spot for that to live. And I just made myself again a note about the newsletters coming up. Lori's going to start working on that soon. That might be a good opportunity to roll something out about code enforcement spring is coming. Like, here's some reminders, and then you know, attaching that kind of information associated. So timely, that stuff should be able to get out relatively quickly. As far as the code updates go, what I've learned is doing this is like it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's so many out there to look at, and without trying to rewrite from scratch, it's trying to Gleam and BH has been a great resource, and we'll probably continue to use them on some of this stuff because they have their hands in a lot of pots when it comes to this stuff. And so identifying and kind of looking to see what would be a good fit here, and just looking at other models, I think. And then, so I don't want to give us a timeline that's realistic, but in reality, that's a months-long project to kind of really give that a good full depth look. And we'll go back, O'Reilly and I, and look at kind of what are the more obtainable ordinances that we can look and like locally that might be kind of quicker to implement than ones that are maybe a little bit bigger bite. When it comes to the court, conversations are happening now about that kind of stuff. We're working on scheduling meetings and having conversations. So that's going, but as you can imagine, you think city government's slow, try working them with county and other cities and other, like it's even slower. So, I would like to say that over the next 6 months, we'll make some progress and identify maybe what's a good direction for the city to go in, whether that's, joining another municipal court or the option of a Westlake Justice Court can be established, or I would say in the next 6 months, it's reasonable to think that we have some direction of which way we would head. But also in that 6 months, I know Bill and I have the goal of, hopefully in the not so distant future, sitting down with our current justice court, staff and kind of talking over our current IGA, reassuring that they will hear code enforcement, violations and kind of just revisiting that with them. So we kind of have that still in place. And there's some contractual requirements for us to actually change direction anyway. And so, that whole process though, I would say we have that sort firmed up with our justice court and maybe a good direction. I would say probably is a reasonable 6 months kind of window, something like that.
So would it be safe to say by National Night Out in August, we could probably see something come before us to?
I would say at least an update with some direction of kind of what we're looking in this direction, whether it's actionable, like we have something in place, we're ready to move, we just need you to sign on the line. I'm not sure that's a reasonable request, but I would say something like we've explored options and this is the one we're leaning in. It's kind of where it's progressed to. I think certainly for the next 6 months, that should probably be reasonable.
Okay, thank you. And just a shameless plug, because I really did love that infographic. Maybe we could get that on a magnet to pass out at National Night Out.
Yes,
Just
yes.
throwing it out there.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, anything else? Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart, so I'm glad that we're getting it clearer and easier to use, and it's a great note for you to go out on.
Yes.
Now. Thanks all. We'll be adjourned let's give it 5 minutes, so we'll reconvene at 7:02 regular council.